Billionaire. Theodore Blackwell forgot everything, but he couldn't forget the woman whose heart he broke 20 years ago. And that memory would change everything. Before starting the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Theo Blackwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 60th floor of the Blackwell Tower, looking down at Manhattan like a king surveying his kingdom. At 68, he controlled a business empire worth $4.7 billion, owned properties in 12 countries, and had more power than most politicians. But Theo had achieved all of this through one simple philosophy. People were expendable, emotions were weakness, and loyalty was just another word for profitable dependency. Theo had built Blackwell Industries from a small real estate company into a global conglomerate by being ruthless, calculating, and completely devoid of sentimentality. He had destroyed competitors, crushed small businesses, and eliminated anyone who stood in his way. His employees feared him, his business partners respected his success, but despised his methods, and even his own family kept their distance. That morning in October started like any other for the past 30 years. Theo arrived at his office at exactly 6 a.m., reviewed overnight reports from his international operations, and began his daily routine of making decisions that affected thousands of lives with the emotional detachment of a chess player moving pieces on a board. His assistant, Margaret Powell, had worked for him for 15 years and had learned to communicate with him in clipped, efficient sentences that wasted no time on pleasantries. "Sir, the Henderson acquisition papers are ready for your signature," Margaret said, entering his office with a stack of documents. "Legal has confirmed that all the employees will be terminated as planned." "Good," Theo replied without looking up from his computer. "What's next?" "The quarterly budget review with department heads is at 10 a.m. The Charity Foundation board meeting has been moved to 2 p.m. Theo paused at the mention of the charity. The Blackwell Foundation was a tax write-off that he barely paid attention to, run by his deceased wife's sister, who insisted on using his money to help worthless causes like homeless shelters and job training programs. "Cancel the charity meeting," Theo said dismissively. "I have more important things to do than listen to bleeding hearts talk about throwing money at problems that can't be solved." Margaret made a note. "Sir, your son called again. He said it's urgent." Theo's jaw tightened. His relationship with his son David had been strained for years, ever since David had chosen to become a public school teacher instead of joining the family business. Theo considered David's career choice a personal betrayal and a waste of his Harvard education. "I'm sure it can wait," Theo said coldly. What Theo didn't know was that David had been trying to reach him for weeks about some concerning symptoms his father had been displaying. Memory lapses, confusion about dates, difficulty following complex conversations. David was worried that his father might be developing dementia, but Theo had always been too proud and controlling to admit any weakness. The morning progressed normally until Theo's 11 a.m. meeting with the board of directors. As Theo was presenting the quarterly projections, something strange happened. Mid-sentence, he stopped talking and stared blankly at the conference room wall. "Sir," Margaret prompted gently, "you were discussing the European expansion numbers." Theo blinked and looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "I'm sorry. What were we talking about?" The board members exchanged concerned glances. Theodore Blackwell never lost his train of thought, never showed confusion, never apologized for anything. "The quarterly projections, sir," said CFO Robert Chen. "You were explaining the revenue growth in our European markets." Theo looked down at the papers in front of him, but the numbers seemed foreign and meaningless. For a moment, he couldn't remember what company he was running or why these people were looking at him expectantly. I think we should postpone this meeting," Theo said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. After the board members filed out, Margaret approached Theo's chair with obvious concern. "Sir, are you feeling all right? Should I call Dr. Morrison?" Theo wanted to dismiss her concerns, to maintain his image of invincibility, but he was frightened by what had just happened. The feeling of complete disorientation, of not recognizing his own conference room, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Yes," he said quietly. "Call Dr. Morrison." Dr. James Morrison had been Theo's personal physician for 20 years and had never seen the powerful CEO look vulnerable. But the man sitting in his office that afternoon was a shadow of the intimidating figure who usually barked orders and demanded immediate results. "Theo, I'm going to be direct with you, Doctor," Morrison said after completing a comprehensive examination and reviewing the results of cognitive tests. "I believe you're in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease." The words hit Theo like a physical blow. Alzheimer's. The disease that slowly stole your mind, your memories, your very self. He had watched his own father deteriorate from the same condition in his final years, and the experience had been one of the few things in Theo's life that had genuinely terrified him. "How long?" Theo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's difficult to predict. The progression varies from person to person. It could be months, it could be years. We'll start you on medications that may slow the advancement. But Theo," Dr. Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully, "you need to start thinking about your affairs, your business, your family, your legacy." Theo felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Everything he had built, everything he had achieved, would eventually be meaningless if he couldn't remember it. Worse, he would become dependent on others, vulnerable and weak, everything he had spent his life refusing to be. "I want you to keep this confidential," Theo said, his business instincts kicking in even in crisis. "If word gets out that I'm sick, it could destabilize the company, affect stock prices." "Of course. But Theo, you should consider telling your family. They need to know what you're facing." Theo nodded absently, but he was already planning how to maintain control for as long as possible. He would hide his condition, delegate more responsibilities to trusted executives, and hope that the medications would buy him enough time to secure his legacy. Over the next few weeks, Theo tried to maintain his normal routine, but the symptoms were getting worse. He would forget important meetings, lose track of conversations, and sometimes find himself in parts of the building with no memory of how he had gotten there. The breaking point came during a crucial negotiation with Japanese investors. Theo was in the middle of presenting their offer when he suddenly stopped talking and looked around the room with confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "but who are you people? And why am I here?" The room fell silent. Theo's own negotiation team stared at him in shock, while the Japanese investors began whispering among themselves. Margaret quickly stepped in to postpone the meeting, but the damage was done. That evening, Theo sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring at family photos that seemed to show strangers. He could remember his late wife Elizabeth, but her face was becoming fuzzy. He could remember building his business empire, but the details were slipping away like sand through his fingers. But there was one memory that remained crystal clear, one face that appeared in his mind with perfect clarity: Rosa Martinez. Rosa had been the head of his household cleaning staff 20 years ago. She was a kind, hard-working woman who had always treated Theo with respect, despite his cold demeanor. But Theo had fired her under circumstances that had haunted him ever since, though he had never allowed himself to dwell on the guilt. Now, as his other memories faded, Rosa's face became more vivid. He could see her dark eyes, her gentle smile, the way she had looked at him with disappointment and hurt when he had destroyed her life. "Rosa," Theo whispered to the empty apartment. "I need to find Rosa." The next morning, Theo called Margaret into his office with an urgency she hadn't heard from him in weeks. "I need you to find someone for me," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped his desk. "Rosa Martinez. She used to work here about 20 years ago." Margaret looked puzzled. "Sir, we employ hundreds of people. Could you be more specific about what department?" "She was a cleaning lady," Theo interrupted, "the head of the cleaning staff. I fired her in 2003. I need you to find her immediately." "Sir, may I ask why?" "If this is about a legal matter, it's personal," Theo said firmly. "Just find her." Margaret began making calls, but tracking down a woman who had been fired 20 years ago proved challenging. The cleaning company that had employed Rosa no longer existed, and personnel records from that era were difficult to locate. Meanwhile, Theo's condition was deteriorating rapidly. He was having difficulty recognizing his own office, forgetting the names of longtime employees, and becoming increasingly agitated when he couldn't find Rosa. "Where is she?" Theo demanded during one of his confused episodes. "Where is my wife? Why isn't Rosa here?" Margaret realized with growing concern that Theo was confusing Rosa with his deceased wife Elizabeth. In his fractured memory, the cleaning lady he had fired had somehow become the most important person in his life. David Blackwell finally forced his way into his father's office after Margaret called him in desperation. "Dad, we need to talk," David said, shocked by his father's appearance. Theo looked smaller, more fragile, and his eyes held a confusion that David had never seen before. "Who are you?" Theo asked, studying David's face with obvious effort. The question cut David to the core. "I'm your son, Dad. I'm David." Theo's face showed no recognition. I don't remember you, but I remember Rosa. Have you seen Rosa? She's supposed to be here. She takes care of me." David sat down heavily in the chair across from his father's desk. The powerful, intimidating man who had ruled his childhood with an iron fist was gone, replaced by a confused, frightened elderly man searching for someone who might not even be alive. "Dad, let me help you," David said gently. "Tell me about Rosa." Theo's face brightened slightly. "Rosa is wonderful. She has the kindest eyes, and she always makes sure everything is perfect. She takes care of the house, takes care of me, but I can't find her anywhere." David realized that his father's mind had created a version of Rosa that bore little resemblance to reality. In Theo's fractured memories, the cleaning lady had become a loving caretaker, perhaps the mother figure or wife that his unconscious mind desperately needed. After consulting with Dr. Morrison, David made the difficult decision to move his father into a specialized memory care facility. But Theo became extremely agitated every time they tried to separate him from his search for Rosa. "You have to find her," Theo pleaded with David, gripping his son's arm with surprising strength. "She's all I have left. Everything else is gone, but Rosa is still here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "She's the only thing that's real anymore." David realized that finding Rosa Martinez might be the only way to calm his father's increasing distress. He hired a private investigator and put every resource he could into the search. Rosa Martinez had built a good life for herself in the 20 years since Theodore Blackwell had destroyed her world. After being fired from Blackwell Industries, she had struggled to find employment due to the negative reference Theo had provided. She had eventually retrained as a certified nursing assistant and now worked as a private caregiver for elderly clients with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. At 65, Rosa was a gentle, patient woman who had learned to find meaning in caring for people whose minds were slipping away. She had never married, having devoted herself to caring for her elderly mother until her death 5 years earlier. Her small apartment in Queens was filled with thank you cards from the families of patients she had helped through their final journeys. Rosa was preparing dinner when her phone rang with a call that would change her life forever. "Ms. Martinez, this is David Blackwell. I believe you used to work for my father, Theodore Blackwell, at Blackwell Industries." Rosa nearly dropped the phone. The name Blackwell still brought back painful memories of the worst period of her life. "Yes," she said carefully. "I worked there a long time ago." "Ms. Martinez, I know this is going to sound strange, but my father is very ill. He has Alzheimer's disease, and he's been asking for you constantly. He seems to think you're his wife." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "I'm sorry to hear about your father's illness, but I don't understand why he would be asking for me. He fired me 20 years ago under very unpleasant circumstances." "I know, and I'm sorry about that. But right now, you're the only person he remembers clearly. The doctors think that seeing you might help calm him down. He's been very agitated and confused." Rosa thought about all the dementia patients she had cared for over the years. She understood how the disease could create false memories, confuse relationships, and cause patients to fixate on certain people from their past. "Mr. Blackwell," Rosa said carefully, What exactly are you asking me to do? Would you consider visiting him? Just once to see if it helps? I know it's a lot to ask, especially given your history with him, but he's suffering, and you seem to be the only thing that brings him peace. Rosa was torn. Part of her wanted nothing to do with Theodore Blackwell, the man who had accused her of theft and ruined her reputation, but her caregiver instincts were stronger than her resentment. "I'll think about it," she said finally. That night, Rosa lay awake remembering her time at the Blackwell mansion. She had genuinely cared about her work and had taken pride in maintaining the beautiful home. She'd even felt sorry for Theodore, who seemed so lonely despite his wealth and power. His wife Elizabeth had been kind but distant, and their son David had been away at boarding school most of the time. Rosa remembered the day everything had fallen apart. Elizabeth's diamond necklace had gone missing, and Theodore had immediately accused Rosa of stealing it. Despite her protests of innocence, despite her 20-year record of honest employment, Theodore had fired her on the spot and threatened to have her arrested if she ever set foot on his property again. The necklace had been found a week later in Elizabeth's jewelry box, having fallen behind a drawer. But Theodore had never apologized, never called to offer Rosa her job back. The false accusation had followed her for months, making it nearly impossible to find new employment. But now, 20 years later, that same man was asking for her in his confusion and fear. Rosa understood that Alzheimer's could strip away the masks people wore, sometimes revealing their true selves underneath. Perhaps the Theodore who was asking for her was the man he might have been, if he hadn't built such high walls around his heart. The next morning, Rosa called David back. "I'll come see him," she said, "but I want you to understand that I'm doing this out of compassion for a sick man, not out of any forgiveness for what your father did to me." "I understand, and Ms. Martinez, thank you." The Sunset Manor. Memory care facility was a far cry from the luxury that Theodore Blackwell had been accustomed to, but it was the best facility available for Alzheimer's patients. David had spared no expense in ensuring his father received quality care, even though Theo no longer recognized the difference between luxury and simplicity. Rosa arrived on a Thursday afternoon, her heart pounding with nervousness. She had spent her career caring for dementia patients, but this was different. This was personal. David met her in the lobby, and Rosa was struck by how much he resembled his father at that age, tall, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes. But where Theodore had always carried himself with cold arrogance, David seemed warm and genuinely concerned. "Ms. Martinez, thank you so much for coming. I know this can't be easy for you." "Please, call me Rosa, and you're right, it's not easy. But I've worked with many Alzheimer's patients over the years. I understand what your father is going through." David led Rosa down a hallway, lined with cheerful artwork and family photos. "I should warn you, he's not the man you remember. The disease has changed him. He's more childlike now, more vulnerable. Sometimes he doesn't recognize me at all." They stopped outside a door, marked with Theodore's name, and a photo of him from happier times. David knocked gently and entered. Theodore was sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at the garden with a lost expression. He had lost weight and looked smaller than Rosa remembered. His once commanding presence had been replaced by the fragile uncertainty of someone whose mind was slipping away. "Dad," David said gently, "there's someone here to see you." Theodore turned toward them, and his face immediately lit up with joy and relief. "Rosa!" he exclaimed, struggling to get up from his chair. "Rosa, you're here! I've been looking everywhere for you!" Rosa felt her heart clench as Theodore reached for her with tears in his eyes. This wasn't the cold, powerful man who had destroyed her life. This was a frightened, confused, elderly man who somehow saw her as his lifeline. "Hello, Theodore," Rosa said softly, allowing him to take her hands. "I knew you'd come back," Theodore said, his voice filled with emotion. "I knew you wouldn't leave me alone. Everyone else has gone away, but you're still here." Rosa looked at David, who was watching the interaction with amazement. His father, who hadn't shown genuine emotion in years, was practically glowing with happiness. "I've missed you so much," Theodore continued, leading Rosa to the small sofa in his room. "Where have you been?" "I couldn't remember where you went." Rosa realized that in Theodore's fractured memory, she wasn't the cleaning lady he had fired. She was someone who loved him, someone who had been an important part of his life. The disease had rewritten their history, creating a version where she was the caring presence he had perhaps always needed, but never allowed himself to have. "I'm here now," Rosa said gently, deciding to go along with his version of reality rather than cause him distress. Theodore smiled, and Rosa was shocked to see how his entire demeanor had changed. The harsh lines of his face had softened, and his eyes held a warmth she had never seen before. "Tell me about your day," Rosa said, settling beside him on the sofa. For the next hour, Theodore talked about his confusion, his fears, and his gratitude that Rosa had returned to him. He spoke like a child who had been lost and finally found his way home. David watched from across the room, witnessing a side of his father he had never known existed. When it was time for Rosa to leave, Theodore became agitated. "No, don't go," he pleaded. "Please don't leave me again." "I'll come back tomorrow," Rosa promised, and she meant it. After Rosa left, David walked her to her car. "I don't understand it," David said. "He's been confused and agitated for weeks, but with you, he seemed, peaceful. Happy." Rosa considered her words carefully. Sometimes Alzheimer's strips away the defenses people have built up over a lifetime. Maybe the man you saw today is who your father always was, underneath all that anger and control. Or maybe, David said quietly, you represent something he never allowed himself to have, unconditional care without judgment. Rosa began visiting Theodore every day, and the change in him was remarkable. The nursing staff reported that he was eating better, sleeping more peacefully, and showing less agitation. He would spend hours talking to Rosa about memories that were part real and part fiction, creating a narrative where she had always been the most important person in his life. "Rosa," Theodore said one afternoon as they sat in the garden, "do you remember when we used to walk in the park on Sundays?" Rosa knew they had never walked in any park together, but she nodded. "Tell me about it." "You would bring sandwiches and we would sit by the pond and watch the ducks. You always knew exactly what I needed before I even asked. You took such good care of me." These fantasy memories were becoming Theodore's reality, and Rosa realized they represented the relationship he wished he had had with someone, perhaps his late wife, perhaps the mother he had lost young, or perhaps just the loving companion he had never allowed himself to need. "You were always so kind to everyone," Theodore continued. "You made me want to be a better person." Rosa felt a complex mix of emotions. The man sitting beside her bore little resemblance to the Theodore Blackwell who had accused her of theft and destroyed her reputation. This version of Theodore was gentle, grateful, and surprisingly insightful about relationships and emotions. "Theodore," Rosa said carefully, "do you remember firing me?" Theodore looked confused. "Firing you? Why would I fire you? You're the most important person in my life." Rosa realized that the traumatic memory of their confrontation had been erased along with so many others. In Theodore's mind, she had never been a mere employee. She had always been his beloved companion. Over the weeks, Rosa learned more about Theodore's life through his fragmented stories and David's explanations. She began to understand the lonely, driven man who had built walls so high that even his own family couldn't reach him. "My father was never affectionate," David told Rosa one evening after visiting ours. "I can't remember him ever saying he loved me or was proud of me. But with you, he's like a different person. He's warm, grateful, emotional. It's like seeing who he might have been if he hadn't been so afraid of vulnerability." Rosa was beginning to see her daily visits as more than just charity. Theodore's genuine affection for her, even if it was based on false memories, was touching something in her own heart that had been closed off for years. "Rosa," Theodore said one day, "I need to tell you something important." "What is it?" Theodore took her hands in his eyes more lucid than she had seen them in weeks. "I think I did something terrible to you once. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I know I hurt you. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes. Even in his confusion, some part of Theodore's conscience was trying to make amends for the pain he had caused. "I forgive you," Rosa said, and realized she meant it. As Theodore's condition continued to deteriorate, Rosa found herself becoming not just his visitor, but his primary caregiver. David offered to pay her for her time, but Rosa had discovered that she genuinely cared about Theodore's well-being. The nursing staff was amazed by Rosa's patience and skill with their most difficult patient. Theodore would refuse meals from everyone else, but would eat anything Rosa brought him. He would have panic attacks when other caregivers tried to help him, but he was calm and cooperative with Rosa. "You have a gift," said Nancy Williams, the head nurse. "In 30 years of working with dementia patients, I've never seen someone connect with a patient the way you do with Mr. Blackwell." Rosa had indeed found her calling in caring for people whose minds were failing. But Theodore was different from her other patients because of their shared history, even if he no longer remembered it accurately. One afternoon, Theodore was having a particularly bad day. He didn't recognize his room, couldn't remember Rosa's name, and was becoming increasingly distressed. "I can't find anything," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything is gone. I don't know where I am or who I'm supposed to be." Rosa sat beside him and spoke in the calm, soothing voice she had perfected over years of caring for confused patients. "You're Theodore Blackwell," she said gently. "You're a successful businessman who built an empire through hard work and determination. You have a son named David who loves you very much. And right now, you're in a safe place where people care about you." "But I can't remember any of that," Theodore said desperately. "How can I be someone if I can't remember who that someone is?" Rosa took his hands. "Memory isn't the only thing that makes you who you are. Your kindness, your gratitude, your capacity for love, those things are still here." She placed her hand over his heart. "The best parts of you are still here." Theodore looked at her with wonder. "How do you know so much about me?" "Because I've been watching you, really watching you for weeks now. And I've seen a man who is grateful for every small kindness, who worries about other people's feelings, who says please and thank you and tells me he loves me every single day. That's who you are, Theodore, not your memories, your heart." Theodore smiled through his tears. "I'm lucky to have you." "We're lucky to have each other," Rosa replied, and realized she meant it completely. David had been watching Rosa's relationship with his father develop with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. The woman who had every reason to hate Theodore Blackwell was treating him with more love and patience than anyone in his actual family ever had. "Rosa," David said one evening as they sat in the facility's family lounge, "I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Why are you doing this? My father destroyed your life 20 years ago. You could have just visited once and left. Why do you keep coming back?" Rosa considered the question carefully. "At first, I came out of pity. Your father was suffering, and I know how to help people with dementia. But then," she paused, searching for the right words, "I realized that taking care of him was healing something in me too." "What do you mean?" "For 20 years, I carried anger and hurt about what your father did to me. That anger was like a poison in my heart. But seeing him now, seeing how vulnerable and grateful he is, I understand that the man who hurt me was also a man who was deeply lonely and afraid. He built walls to protect himself, but those walls also kept out love." David nodded. "My father was never able to show affection or admit weakness. I think that's why my mother was so unhappy and why our family fell apart. But with Alzheimer's, those walls have come down. The Theodore I spend time with now is gentle, loving, and emotionally open. Maybe this is who he always was underneath, or maybe this is who he could have been if he hadn't been so afraid." "Do you think he really remembers you, or are you just a fantasy to him?" Rosa smiled sadly. "I think I represent everything he wishes he had allowed himself to have. Unconditional love, emotional support, someone who cared about his well-being without wanting anything in return. Whether he remembers the real me or not doesn't matter. What matters is that for the first time in his life, he's experiencing what it feels like to be truly loved." David was quiet for a moment. "Rosa, would you consider moving in with him as his full-time caregiver? I know it's a lot to ask, but he's so much happier with you around." Rosa was surprised by the request. "David, I couldn't accept payment for this. It wouldn't feel right. I'm not talking about just payment. I'm talking about becoming part of our family. My father may not remember our history, but I remember that he wronged you. Let me make it right. Let me give you the security and respect you should have had 20 years ago." Rosa felt tears in her eyes. "I'll think about it." That night, Rosa sat in her small apartment, surrounded by photos and mementos from her years of caring for dementia patients. She thought about all the families she had helped through the difficult journey of losing their loved ones to Alzheimer's and how fulfilling that work had been. But Theodore was different. With her other patients, she had been a professional caregiver providing a service. With Theodore, she had become something more, the embodiment of love and security in his fractured world. The next morning, Rosa returned to the facility with her decision. "I'll do it," she told David, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I want to be involved in all medical decisions regarding your father's care. Second, I want a legal agreement that protects both of us. I don't want anyone to ever again accuse me of taking advantage of a vulnerable person. And third, I want your father to have as much dignity and quality of life as possible for as long as possible." David agreed to all her conditions, and within a week, Rosa had moved into the guest suite at Theodore's memory care facility. She became his primary caregiver, his companion, and in his mind, his beloved wife. The change in Theodore was immediate and profound. Having Rosa nearby around the clock eliminated most of his anxiety and confusion. He still had bad days, but Rosa's presence provided a constant anchor of security and love. "Good morning, my darling," Theodore would say each morning when Rosa helped him get dressed. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Rosa would reply, marveling at how natural it felt to be part of this tender daily routine. Theodore's doctors were amazed by his improvement. His agitation decreased dramatically, he was eating and sleeping better, and he seemed genuinely content for the first time since his diagnosis. Rosa, Dr. Martinez, no relation, told her during one of Theodore's regular checkups, "Whatever you're doing is working. Mr. Blackwell is one of the happiest Alzheimer's patients I've ever treated." Rosa knew that Theodore's happiness came from finally experiencing the unconditional love he had never allowed himself to receive. In his confused state, he had found the emotional connection that had eluded him his entire life. 6 months after Rosa had become Theodore's full-time caregiver, she realized that she had fallen in love with him. Not with the powerful, cruel businessman he had been, but with the gentle, grateful man he had become. His vulnerability had revealed a capacity for love that had always existed beneath his defenses. "Rosa," Theodore said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset through his window, "I want to tell you something." "What is it?" Theodore took her hand, his eyes more lucid than they had been in weeks. "I know I'm sick. I know my mind is going away piece by piece, but I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life." Rosa felt her heart swell. "Mine too." "I love you," Theodore said simply. "I don't remember much anymore, but I remember that. I love you, and I'm grateful for every day you choose to stay with me." "I love you too," Rosa replied, and she meant it completely. As Theodore's condition continued to deteriorate, Rosa became not just his caregiver, but his memory keeper. She would tell him stories about their imagined life together, creating a narrative of love and happiness that brought him comfort. "Tell me about our wedding," Theodore would ask, and Rosa would describe a beautiful ceremony that had never happened, but felt real in both their hearts. "Tell me about our children," he would say, and Rosa would talk about David as if he were their son together, creating a family story that gave Theodore peace. David watched this relationship develop with amazement and gratitude. His father, who had been emotionally unavailable his entire life, was finally experiencing and expressing love. It was too late for their relationship to be healed, but David found comfort in knowing that his father's final years were filled with happiness. Theodore Blackwell passed away peacefully 2 years after Rosa had come back into his life. He died holding her hand, with David at his other side, surrounded by the love he had finally learned to accept. In his lucid moments during those final weeks, Theodore had worked with David and Rosa to establish the Rosa Martinez Caregiving Foundation, which provided support and training for people caring for family members with dementia. His entire fortune was divided between the foundation, David, and Rosa, ensuring that his legacy would be one of healing rather than harm. At Theodore's funeral, Rosa was surprised by the number of people who approached her with gratitude. "Mr. Blackwell changed so much in his final years," said Margaret, his former assistant. "He became kind, generous, thoughtful. People said it was the disease, but I think it was you. You showed him how to love." Rosa realized that Theodore's transformation had affected everyone around him. His business associates, his household staff, even casual acquaintances had noticed the change in him. The cold, ruthless businessman had become a warm, grateful man who thanked people for their kindness and asked about their families. A year after Theodore's death, Rosa was managing the foundation that bore her name and continuing to work with dementia patients. She had found her true calling in helping families navigate the difficult journey of losing someone to Alzheimer's. David had become like a son to her, and she had gained the family she had never had. The foundation was thriving, helping hundreds of families each year. "Do you think my father knew who you really were at the end?" David asked Rosa one day as they reviewed applications for foundation grants. Rosa smiled. "I think that in his heart he always knew. Alzheimer's might have confused his memories, but it couldn't change the fact that he had wronged me and needed to make amends. His soul found a way to do that, even when his mind couldn't remember the details." "Do you think he was really different, or just confused?" "I think he was both," Rosa said thoughtfully. "The disease stripped away his defenses and showed us who he might have been if he hadn't been so afraid of being vulnerable. But the capacity for love and gratitude was always there. He just never let it show." Rosa looked at a photo on her desk showing her and Theodore during one of their garden walks. In the picture, he was smiling with genuine joy, holding her hand, looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "He taught me that it's never too late for forgiveness," Rosa said, "and I taught him that it's never too late to love." Their story had become a testament to the healing power of compassion, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that love can emerge in the most unexpected circumstances. Theodore Blackwell had spent 70 years building walls around his heart, but in the end, it was a woman whose heart he had broken who helped him tear those walls down. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the deepest losses. Theodore lost his memory, but he found his heart. Rosa lost her resentment, but she found her purpose. And together, they discovered that love has the power to heal any wound and transform any life, no matter how late in the story it arrives. In the end, Theodore Blackwell was remembered not as the ruthless businessman who had destroyed lives in pursuit of profit, but as the man who had learned to love in his final years. And Rosa Martinez, the maid he had fired 20 years earlier, became the woman who saved his soul. What do you think? Can forgiveness really heal decades-old wounds? Have you ever seen someone completely change when faced with illness or vulnerability? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Don't forget to click on the videos at the end of the screen for more inspiring stories about love, forgiveness, and second chances.